came on the 21st of February 1974, when they received an unexpected invitation to perform 7 Seas of Rye on Top of the Pops. EMI rushed out a single within 2 days, and Queen broke into the top 10.
7 Seas of Rye concludes the first Queen album, Queen 1 if you want to call it that, and it was almost setting up the proper version of 7 Seas of Rye, which occurred on the second album, Queen 2. The reason they did it was they had it basically planned out and thought, rather like the end of a James Bond movie when they say the end of such and such, but James Bond will be back with, it sets up something. So what they were doing was giving a certain snippet, a certain commercial as it were, for album number 2. The full version is on Queen 2, and was released as a single, became their first hit. Part of the reason it became their first hit was it also coincided with their first Top of the Pops appearance. Now, David Bowie dropped out. Top of the Pops called up Eric Hall, who was doing their PR at the time, plugging away, and became known many years later as a sports agent, but at the time he was plugging Queen, kept plugging Queen to Top of the Pops. Top of the Pops weren't interested. Bowie dropped out at the last minute, so Top of the Pops rang up Eric Hall and said, "You know this band you keep going on to us about Queen, can they do Top of the Pops and do it virtually at the last minute?" And of course, yes was the answer. You don't turn something down like that. Although Freddie Mercury didn't want to do it. He just said, "I don't want to do Top of the Pops, that's rubbish." But the other 3 members of the band outvoted him and said, "No, we want to do it. It's really important." At the time, what Top of the Pops insisted on is you had to re-record the backing track to your song and then mime the vocals. So Queen went in rather rushed into Trident, did the backing track as a new recording, which was a musicians' union requirement, but it turned out really badly. So what Eric Hall did, he gave Top of the Pops the original recording, and they never knew it. So in a way, Queen cheated to get onto Top of the Pops, but that exposure, 10 million people or whatever, rocketed the band. They had a big hit. Queen 2 was a successful album and really got the band started on the way to stardom.
The one that did it was 7 Seas of Rye. For one thing, it had a very, very picturesque title. And this is at a time when rock had picturesque titles. Dark Side of the Moon is one. How about Tales from Topographic Oceans by Yes? So 7 Seas of Rye, oh, that's interesting. Yes, we have 7 seas, but rye, what's that? So it draws you in, it makes you interested, and it starts to create a rock fantasy. That's very much a rock song. And up until this point, Queen are very much a rock band. There's no idea of what they're going to become. 7 Seas of Rye just scrapes into the top 10, but it puts them on the map.
Seven Seas of Rye is a wonderful track. It's got so many moments which are typical of Queen, including Brian May's trademark guitar sound. There are the vocal harmonies which certainly became part of Queen all through their career. So in a way it's a trademark Queen song, and it's very heavy as well. And at the time when Queen certainly started to build their audience through the heavy rock fraternity, it was perfect because it retained the heaviness. And whenever you hear it now with that chugging guitar and so forth, it still remains a classic of its kind and a classic of heavy rock.
Compared to later productions, there are certain weaknesses. As I say, the vocals tended to get a little bit drowned, a lot more guitar, bass and drums going on. So I think Freddie hadn't quite exerted his personality at that point. It was coming through, but he hadn't dominated the group in the way that he did later.
Queen 2 was released on the 8th of March 1974, and the band's first headline tour swiftly followed. The album achieved a chart position of number 5 and had gone silver by September 1974. But despite this growing commercial success, the music press remained unconvinced, maintaining that the band were yet to find a strong identity.
I think they did have pretensions to being an art band at that stage. I think they lost those fairly rapidly, and to me that's when they became a lot more appealing. I mean, some of those early lyrics on songs like Seven Seas of Rye are clearly trying too hard, and there is a sort of Dungeons and Dragons element to it all, a Tolkien-esque kind of thing, and they dumped that pretty quickly, quite honestly.
The album is Brian May's favourite, bizarrely, because it was the last truly heavy metal album, as it were. He's a guitar player and likes rocking out. It was a very disparate sort of album. They had a white side and a black side. The black side was all Brian May. I think Roger Taylor had a track on the white side, and the rest of it was Fred. And all of the black stuff, the black side was all riffing on the guitar, Ogre Battle and all this sort of thing. Absolutely fantastic stuff. In 1974, it was fine. Led Zeppelin was sort of not quite sure what was going on with them. Hendrix was dead, bless him. And the rest of it was all Yes and Genesis, which is very difficult stuff to get into unless you were of that mindset. So bombastic heavy metal with a slight twist, i.e. Freddie Mercury, as it happens. It was, again, in hindsight, it was an interesting album. At the time, I don't think anybody knew what to make of it.
Queen were never that heavily into a rock sound, no matter how much of a genius Brian was as a rock guitarist. And so they were never going to be as heavy as Sabbath or Purple, but they were never going to be as top 40 tuneful, or so it seemed, as the Beatles. So where does that leave them? Elton John and Rod Stewart had the international top 40 wrapped up. So it very definitely seemed, until Sheer Heart Attack, that they were just going to be an interesting group.
In October 1974, Queen found the watershed. Killer Queen, the first single from the forthcoming album Sheer Heart Attack, reached number 2 in the UK Top 40 and finally drew enthusiasm from the press.
She keeps a Moet Chandon in a pretty cabinet. Let them eat cake, she says, just like Marie Antoinette. Building a remedy for Khrushchev and Kennedy at any time, an imitation you can.
Killer Queen, right from the acoustic of the finger snapping at the very beginning, a very loud, dynamic acoustic of something which shouldn't be that loud, but sounds great. It's like, how did Holland Dozier Holland make the organ swell at the beginning of Stop in the Name of Love so loud? But they did. Or the hand claps at the beginning of Where Did Our Love Go? But they did. And thus the finger snapping in Killer Queen. And with Freddie's lyrics, the reference right away to Moet and Chandon in the first line, the reference to Khrushchev and Kennedy, who were only 10 years behind us at that time. This was an adult lyric. And it was a very British lyric, in the style of Noel Coward, but for the rock generation.
That single is the first one that brought the band to the masses, as it were. As you say, it got to number 2 in the charts. And